Hey everyone, Sam here, thanks for joining me. In this video I'm going to show you how to paint a rural landscape, and I'm going to give you some specific tips for mixing greens for grass, creating lighting effects and some tips on composition. Now, like some of my recent videos, this painting started off as a plein air painting and then I added more detail to it in the studio. So the first half of the video is me painting outdoors, and then the second part is me adding detail to this painting in the studio, and it took on a bit of a life of its own here, and the actual finished result of the painting was quite different from how it started, but nonetheless I really enjoyed painting this one. Now, if you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Now, before I start the video, I'd just like to quickly tell you about Portfolio Box. If you're an artist or creative and you're looking to build a website, then check out portfoliobox.net. It's specifically designed for creatives such as artists, photographers, designers, architects, makeup artists, musicians and more. And it's an online website builder that allows you to create a beautiful, professional looking website to tell your story and show your work to the highest standard. Portfolio Box is really easy to use, and there are lots of different templates and styles for you to choose from. You don't need to know how to code, the whole program works through drop and drag. Now, if you'd like to trial Portfolio Box without any commitments, then simply go over to their website and create an account and start building your website right away. Then, when you want to take it live, simply choose the plan that you would like to purchase. Now, Portfolio Box plans are very affordable, and as a subscriber to my YouTube channel, Portfolio Box are offering a 50% discount on any plan for the first year simply by typing in the discount code, which I've put in the description box below. Now, I'm really happy with Portfolio Box. In fact, I've created my own website to showcase my paintings. So if you'd like to see an example of a website that's built on the Portfolio Box platform, then check out my website at samuelerpfineart.com. So it's all there in the description box below, a link to their website and the discount code. Check out portfoliobox.net and start building your website today. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let's roll the tape. Okay, so I've got my gear set up and I'm about to start painting. It is a bit showery today, but I'm hoping I'll be able to dodge them. If not, I'll just have to cover my painting in my camera, but we'll see how we get on. And this is the view I'm going to be painting. I'm set up at the side of the road here. It's just a nice simple landscape to paint. Often simple landscapes look really good in plein air paintings, and I think I'll even drop some of these cows in there too. So yeah, excited to paint this, and I shall, well, see how it goes, and then I'll probably add more to it in the studio. Who knows, if it's a real nice painting, I might even do a bigger version of it. Let's see how we get on. Right, before I begin painting, I'll just quickly show you my setup here. I'm painting on an Alla Prima Pochade box, and it's made by a guy called Ben Haggett, who lives in Montana in the USA, and he hand makes all of these, and they're just so nice to paint on, so intuitive. It's got storage compartments for your paints, there's a spare palette there, brush holder, and then even inside, you can't see it that well, but there's storage spaces to put your panels. They've also got magnets inside them, so I can adjust the height of this as well, and it just mounts on a camera tripod, so it's really cool, really handy for painting outdoors, and you can use them in the studio as well. The colours I'm using, I try to keep it relatively simple, especially painting outdoors, but I'm using titanium white, burnt sienna, yellow oxide, cadmium yellow, cadmium orange, quinacridone magenta, ultramarine blue, cobalt teal and phthalo green. It's not essential to use cobalt teal, and I just use it just because it's quite handy, but you can get away with a real limited palette, which I'd often suggest when you're painting outdoors, because you want to be quick when you're painting outside just because the weather changes so much. So I'm going to start sketching this out. Let's see how we get on. So I begin my painting by sketching out the composition using a number 1 round brush. Now for this I'm just using burnt sienna mixed with liquin, which is the medium I'm going to be using, and as I'm using oil paint, the advantage of liquin is that it speeds up the drying time, but it also improves the flow of the paint. Now when you're painting outdoors on plein air, using liquin can be particularly advantageous because your painting can often start drying within the hour, especially if it's hot, so this can be good if you want to layer in some final highlights just before you finish your painting. When using liquin, your paintings typically touch dry within 24 hours. As I sketch out my painting, I'm thinking about the composition. There's some things I really like in this landscape, like the stream and the stand of tortura trees that are in the midground. So these are going to be the 2 main areas of interest in my painting. The stream is going to add a sense of rhythm to the painting as it leads the eye towards the stand of trees. Now what I've done with the stand of trees here is I've placed them off centre and to the left inside the composition. You should never have centred objects or focal areas in the middle of your painting. It causes a displeasing static within the painting and obstructs the flow of the composition. So for this reason I've kept the stand of trees to the left of the centre. The other thing is I've made the horizon a high horizon. So again, we shouldn't have the horizon line in the middle of the painting. You should either go for a higher horizon or a lower horizon. Now that I've sketched out my composition, the first thing I think about, especially when I paint outdoors, is painting the dark values and the shadows first. Now when you're painting outdoors, this is particularly important because the sunlight moves, and that means the shadows move. Now shadows are the easiest tools for creating a 3-dimensional effect in your painting. So you want to get those in first, because you don't want to find that an hour later the sun's moved and the shadows have disappeared altogether. So I paint these in first and I apply the same principles to a studio painting as well. So dark values in first, but what are values? Values are how light or dark a subject is, and I consider it more important than getting the colours right. Now if we can sort out our shadows to begin with, it's going to make it much easier to paint those areas in light afterwards. This means it's also going to be easier to create the atmospheric depth in the painting and make it look realistic. So I start with the furthest zone away, and that's the sky, and the first thing I do is paint those cloud shadows. Now at this time of year in northern New Zealand we get a lot of squally showers and sudden downpours. We get some amazing looking clouds that are great to paint, but probably not so fun if you end up caught in a shower in one of them. Here these clouds are backlit because the sun is behind them, so we're getting some quite dark shadows within them. I mix the cloud shadows with a combination of ultramarine blue with a little burnt sienna, which takes the saturation out of the blue, and then I get the value that I want by mixing in titanium white. Now ultramarine blue and burnt sienna form the basis of my palette. They're probably my 2 most useful colours, and you can create some beautiful natural looking greys with burnt sienna, ultramarine blue and titanium white. Another thing to keep in mind with skies is they're generally some of the lightest values you'll find in the landscape. Obviously there's some exceptions with stormy looking clouds, for example. Now in this particular landscape we don't have any elements that are too far into the distance. We've mostly got a foreground and a midground here really. But we still need to pay attention to our values in order to create the atmospheric depth that we want in the painting. Now the main thing to remember with values is that we'll find our darkest and our lightest values in the foreground. Yet as landforms recede into the distance, the darks are not quite dark and lights are not quite light as that value scale narrows. And by sticking to these principles we can make our distant hills look further away. So the next thing to paint here are the shadows in the trees, and what I've done here is I've mixed a combination of ultramarine blue with a little yellow oxide. Now the yellow oxide itself will also adjust the value of the colour because yellows are much lighter in value than other colours on your palette. So by using more yellow oxide, I'm going to make the value of the colour lighter, but I risk increasing the saturation, which is something I don't want. So for those more distant tree shadows, I mix in some titanium white. Now I'll find my darkest tree shadows in the foreground. And another thing to remember about trees is they are some of the darkest values you'll find in the landscape. So for those trees that are closer to the foreground, I've just mixed ultramarine blue with a little yellow oxide. Now I'm using yellow oxide here. You can also use yellow ochre. Yellow oxide's just a tiny bit punchier. Now after painting those tree shadows, I next paint in the shadows in the grass. Grass is generally a much lighter value in the landscape. Now you must make sure that your grass is much lighter in value than your trees, otherwise your trees are not going to stand out in your painting. So the shadows here just form the bones of the painting and gives us something to work with. So once I've done that, I go straight back to the sky and I start painting those cloud highlights, and here I just use a simple mix of titanium white with a little bit of burnt sienna. Now as burnt sienna is a dark orange, it gives the highlights a nice orange glow to them, and it also helps the clouds to sit back in the landscape. As titanium white is the lightest value we're going to use in the painting, it does have a tendency to leap forward, so the burnt sienna just helps it sit back. Because I've used burnt sienna in the cloud shadows as well as the titanium white, those two colours are going to combine nicely if I want to blend them in a little bit. Now following that, I start painting the sky. This is also a light value colour, and this is a mix of titanium white with a little ultramarine blue, and I've mixed in just a little bit of cobalt teal. Cobalt teal is a really nice colour. It's like a turquoise blue that's really useful for skies and painting grass within the landscape. Now if you have difficulty getting cobalt teal, you can actually make a colour similar to it by mixing ultramarine blue with titanium white and a little bit of phthalo green. Once I've painted the sky, I then move on to the grass in the fields, which covers most of the painting. I want to make those more distant fields sit back a little bit in the painting, so what I've done here is I start off with ultramarine blue with a little yellow oxide, and then I mix in some cobalt teal and some titanium white. I need to keep my greens a little more desaturated here so that they sit back in the landscape. Now part of the reason I'm using yellow oxide in the mix is because the colour itself is not as high in chroma as say something like cadmium yellow. And chroma is another word for saturation. Now as we look at landforms in the distance, we'll see a lot more low chroma colours or desaturated colours, and this is because greens and yellows in particular don't travel well over a long distance and they tend to fall out. So we need to desaturate them in order to make them sit back in our painting. If we were to use saturated greens, it would leap forward in the painting and then we would lose the atmospheric depth and the painting would look flat. Now as I've worked towards the foreground in this painting, I've started increasing the saturation of the green by introducing some cadmium yellow into the mix, and even a little phthalo green, which also helps to increase the saturation. Now if the mixture's looking too green, then I usually round off the colour with something that contains red, which is opposite to green on the colour wheels. I've found that a colour like quinacridone magenta or cadmium orange or burnt sienna works really nicely with this. Now when I come to paint those areas of the tortura trees that are in light, I keep in mind that they have an olive yellow cast to the foliage. So here I've mixed ultramarine blue with some yellow oxide and a little titanium white, but I've mixed in more yellow oxide into the mix. I've placed that large Monterey pine tree on the right side of the painting in the distance to help anchor the composition. It's in shadow and also there's a rain shower in the distance, so the colours here are low in chroma, and what I've done is I've mixed ultramarine blue with some yellow oxide and titanium white. Next I paint the cowls, and I'm not worried if they're too accurate because I'm going to be working on them a lot more in the studio. but I just want to mark in their basic forms. So most of these cows are in shadow with a few highlights on them, and I've mixed ultramarine blue with some burnt sienna and a little titanium white. I've gone heavier on the burnt sienna, seeing as the cow's fur is generally a reddish brown colour. For the areas of their white coloured fur, I've mixed titanium white with a little ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. And then for the highlights where the cow's face, for example, is in the full sunlight, it's just a mix of titanium white with a small amount of burnt sienna. Now, the one thing you may have noticed with this painting is that I've set up my pochade box so that the painting is in shadow. The reason for this is it helps to reduce the glare from the direct sun reflecting off the linen surface, and also because it helps with the overall tonality of the painting, keeping those colours lighter. So I'm back in the studio now, and I'd actually had this painting sat on my shelf for a few weeks, and I was looking at it, deciding what to do, whether to just finish it as is or maybe make some changes to it. I went through my photo reference as well, and I decided to create some more dramatic lighting effects within the painting. So I decided to change it completely. Now, the clouds here from when I was plein air painting I was reasonably happy with, so all I did was start adding more detail. And I was using the same colours that I used when I was painting outdoors. So for the cloud shadows, a mix of ultramarine blue with a little burnt sienna and titanium white. Then for those cloud highlights, titanium white with a little burnt sienna. And for the sky, ultramarine blue with some cobalt teal and titanium white. There are heavier looking clouds in the sky, but I make sure that the clouds in the sky are not too dark. Now, with some of my photo reference here, you can see that there was some showers happening in the distance that was creating some cool effects with the tonality of the scene. So I decided to paint some spotlighting effects within the midground of this painting to add a lot more drama and atmosphere to it. So the first thing I did was to paint those distant fields as if they're in shadow, and what I did was I mixed a combination of ultramarine blue with some yellow oxide, then some cobalt teal and titanium white. I also introduced a little bit of quinacridone magenta just to harmonise the green a little bit. The red that's in the quinacridone magenta is also going to help to desaturate that green. Now, I've painted a lot more shadow areas in the grass in the midground here, but I want the main areas of light to be near the stand of tortura trees in the midground. Once I've painted the grass shadow areas, I then restate the shadows in the trees. And for the midground trees, I want those to come forward a bit, the trees that are the main focal area of the painting. So what I've done here is I've mixed ultramarine blue with a little yellow oxide. But those trees that are more in the background, I want to fade them out a little bit more to make it look like perhaps it's raining a little bit in the distance. So what I've done here is I've mixed ultramarine blue with some yellow oxide but a lot more titanium white to make the value lighter, and this is going to make them sit back in the painting. Now, I've also done the same with that Monterey pine tree that's on the right side of the painting. Now, when it comes to painting those highlights in the grass that are in the full sunlight, to create that spotlighting effects is I've taken my existing grass shadow mix and then I've introduced some cadmium yellow, which is going to really increase the saturation of that green. I've then made the value lighter by mixing in some titanium white. And then I can readjust the mixture by mixing in a small amount of ultramarine blue and some phthalo green, which is going to increase the saturation. If the green's looking too cold, then it can be warmed up with a little yellow oxide or by mixing in some quinacridone magenta. Now, I vary the mixtures of my greens here and I cover the rest of the painting. The cow that's on the left side of the painting in the foreground, I want that to be in the full sunlight, so I've made sure to paint the grass around it with my grass highlight mix, which is lighter in value and more saturated. The rest of the foreground is going to be in partial shadow, as a cloud has just passed over. Now as I paint that grass in the foreground, the one thing that was bugging me about one of those cows there was I felt that it was obstructing the flow in the composition where the stream leads the eye towards the stand of trees, so that needed to be moved. Once I'd worked on the foreground, I then returned to the stand of trees in the midground and painted a few more highlights on them by introducing some more cadmium yellow, yellow oxide, titanium white, but then also a little bit of cadmium orange and quinacridone magenta. And this is because the foliage of the torture tree tends to have a more yellowish olive cast to it. The whole time I'm painting these highlights, I'm keeping in mind the value of this colour. At this point I allowed the painting to dry so that I could then add some more detail to it. Now I let it dry for a couple of days, and whilst I was looking at it in my studio, I noticed that the sky was perhaps a little bit too dark, so I decided to make the value of those cloud shadows a little bit lighter. Now I'm still using the same colours that I've used all along, but I've just added more titanium white into my mix to increase the value that will make it lighter. After that I start painting in more of those cloud highlights, but this time I'm using fewer of them, although again I'm still using the same colours, which is titanium white and burnt sienna, but much less burnt sienna into my mix. I add a few highlights here and there, which just adds to the three-dimensional form of these clouds and makes it look like the sun's shining behind them. I'm pretty happy with the tonality of this painting so far, so now I can begin adding more details to this painting. So there's lots of randomly placed bushes, trees and shrubs, cabbage trees and small conifers. And what I'm doing now is building up the form of the painting by adding lighter layers, especially in the grasses, where the direct sun is shining through the clouds. I'm using the same colour mix that I used before, but there'll be more titanium white in the mix, as I'm making subtle adjustments to the values of my colour, introducing lighter tones. The brushes that I've found most useful in this painting, given that this is only a small painting as well, is a number 2 flat brush and a number 3 filbert brush. Now the advantage of filbert brushes is you can use the broad end of the brush for gestural brush marks, but then the bristles are rounded at the end, so you can use those for finer details. It's a very versatile brush to use in landscape painting. Now for those pine trees on the right side of the painting, I want to make them look a little bit more like trees, so I punched some holes in them with my sky mix to give the illusion that there's gaps in those tree canopies. At this point I allowed the painting to dry again, and the next thing I'm going to focus on afterwards is painting more details on these animals that are in the painting, which are mainly cows and a few sheep. Now cows and sheep are most definitely good for communicating a rural scene, and they add life and interest to a painting. So here I'm repainting the cow that I originally erased from the painting, and now I've shifted it more to the right side of the painting so it's not obstructing the stream. This cow is another prop within the composition that's going to help lead the eye towards the stream and ultimately to the stand of trees in the midground. The colours I've used to paint the cows here is mostly a mix of burnt sienna with some ultramarine blue and titanium white. I've gone heavier on the burnt sienna because the cow's fur is mostly a brown reddish colour. I've also mixed in places a little bit of yellow oxide as well. I'm using fine synthetic round brushes to paint the cows here, mainly because they're quite small. I'm using number 0 and 00 synthetic round brushes, which have got a nice fine point to them. Now once I've finished painting these cows, I then paint the final highlights in the painting, adding my lightest values but also my final details as well, and I've saved all of this until the very end of the painting. So I've painted some shadows in the foreground and the grass areas, And then the next thing I work on is the stream in the midground. Now the stream is reflecting the sky, so I've used the same colours that I've used in the sky, a mix of ultramarine blue with some titanium white and a little cobalt teal. And then with a number 00 round brush and a mix of titanium white with a small amount of yellow oxide, I've just painted a few sparkles in the water to communicate shimmering water in the sun. I also paint a few highlights in those trees as well, which just helps to add to the three-dimensional form of them. It's the same colours that I was using before, but with much more titanium white. However, I need to make sure that the titanium white doesn't desaturate the colour too much. Now the last thing that I need to keep in mind with this painting is that the animals and the trees and shrubs are casting a shadow, because this is going to add to the three-dimensional form of the painting, and it will make it look much more realistic. So I finish up the painting by just adding a few details here and there. Now if you enjoyed this video and would like to have a go at painting this yourself, then click the link below to the written tutorial that accompanied this video, which can be found on my painting blog on my website. And feel free to copy the painting and use the reference photos that I've provided. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to my channel. Also, feel free to leave me a comment. Now if you'd like to learn more about painting, then check out the painting resources I have on my website at samuelerp.com. There's lots of free written painting tutorials for you to paint along with. You can also use the reference photos, and I also have full-length painting tutorial videos for sale from there as well. Now you can get instant access to all of those full-length painting tutorial videos by subscribing to me on Patreon for just $5 a month, where, as I say, you get instant access to all of my full-length painting tutorial videos, as well as a new painting video every month. Now if you'd like to see what paintings I'm working on at the moment, then you can follow me on Instagram and Facebook, and you can also check out my paintings on my new website, which is solely for my artworks, at samuelerpfineart.com. Now as I stated earlier, this is built on the Portfolio Box platform, so if you're looking to build a website, don't forget Portfolio Box are offering 50% off any of their plans for the first year, and I've put all the links and the discount code in the description box below. So thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I shall see you in the next video.